Thank you, Hanem. I mean, there's clearly been an evolution, and like with so many different technologies, you begin thinking that the technology could be benign, and then you reach a point where you think it has mixed blessings. And the people who are, quite understandably have a liberal democratic view of these things would hope that, such is the nature of democracy, whether it's in person or online, the very context would find it a sort of natural equilibrium, that it will balance itself out. And certainly in my experience when I was the Director of E-communications, the first one that the UK government had, and I set up the first government portal, we had pretty much a benign view of websites. And then several years later, when I introduced social media and tweets at the Foreign Office, again, a benign view of social media. I think rather like with Tim Berners-Lee, we've all become a little, somewhat disappointed and concerned that things can take quite a negative turn. And the question is, even though it's very welcome that we have so many different ways, so many different channels in which people can express themselves, get information, share information, and give their comments, you do begin to worry about the provenance of that information, and particularly you begin to get concerned about information that is inaccurate or misleading, and the right of redress. Now, from a conventional media background, I have spent a whole career living with the different forms of regulation. It's sometimes uncomfortable, particularly if you're a journalist, but nonetheless, ultimately, a well-regulated, not necessarily over-regulated, but a better regulated system gives confidence to everyone. It means that certainly in journalism and conventional journalism, you can work to certain standards. They are either imposed by society or imposed by the institution you work with, or a combination, or readers or users make up their own view. They choose you or they do not. The problem about the current environment is that unless the free for all is addressed, you find people who cannot express their views or find their views marginalized. And you also find, I think, that the confidence in institutions who are providing the platform begins to erode. And this is very serious. If you're Facebook or Twitter or anyone who has a platform, you've got to understand why newspapers ended up being seen as publishers. And with publication, there are obviously rights, but there are also responsibilities. And I think it's hugely important that we have a system that we all have confidence in, that balances rights with responsibilities, because without that, you begin to undermine the rights of individuals and the rights of minorities. So I suppose from a government perspective, you want, if you like, the context to reach its own conclusion. But I think there also has to be an appreciation that unless we operate here on a global level, we will find that people take advantage of the fact that you cannot find redress in one country. And I'm with Natalie and Paul in looking at what could be a global framework here that everybody could follow and work within, that has enough freedom within that framework, but equally has in it, what I call the 5 R's. You've got respect, you've got rights, you've got responsibilities, you've got restraint, you've got regulation. And I think from time to time a review, because it's a fast moving, evolving situation. There's a legal, political, regulatory dimension this, which we cannot escape. And we have enough people on the panel and taking part in this who are speaking very well. And it's especially valuable to have a senior politician also joining us. What I would say is always important is to get the public engagement side of this right. And I don't think enough of the public realize just how corrosive the bad side of the social media is. It's almost like people put up with it because they don't know there's another way. And I give a very concrete example here in the United Kingdom, and I think Ian would recognize it. We have a program here called University Challenge. So for the past 10 years, I've been working in the higher education sector. And for years now, we've had a quiz game called University Challenge. You couldn't imagine anything more innocuous. Students come together and they test their wits, and ultimately there's a winner. What we've seen recently is a number of women contestants, women students, who are more and more concerned about appearing on University Challenge. And one reason for that is that on social media, people can take issue with a contestant because of their gender, because of any sort of reason. And a number of women feel quite, as I understand it, feel quite vulnerable because of the social media. We can't have a Wild West going on in, in eternity on social media. We have to begin to expect a much higher standard, if only to make sure that it continues to be inclusive. So I would say, let's also try and make sure we get people on side, hearts and minds, to appreciate this is serious, it's corrosive, and something needs to be done about it. And if you're Facebook or anyone else, you can't just wait for pressure to be brought upon you. You've got to be proactive in your policy. Yeah. I'm just very interested and really appreciated Ian's comments and Natalie's. Paul, you seem to have a very good sense of what will make these giants listen up or shift their position. It feels to me that we almost have to be in campaign mode. What would it take to get enough pressure, influence used or leveraged to get these giants to think differently and act differently? I'd like to ask Paul a question. Where's their Achilles heel here? I mean, it sounds like anyone's Achilles heel is the income, but I'd be quite interested to know from you is, where do we target our sense of anger, disappointment, frustration, so that we can find a constructive way of shifting the dial here?